Hey everybody, I've got a Montana whitetail float hunt to share with you. Montana has some great whitetail hunting along the timbered river bottoms and near crop fields. Most of the good habitat is on private property, but there are a few hard to access public parcels out there. This is my first whitetail hunt in Montana, and the weather is unusually mild, so I'm taking out my inflatable canoe for a multi-day float trip. I broke my toe in a hockey game a few days ago, so I grabbed some chocolate milk to make sure I'm getting my calcium out there. I'll be hunting by myself, so I'm going to use this street legal UTV to get back to my truck after the float. This is my very first raft. I bought it about 10 years ago for a caribou hunt. It's held up to a lot of abuse over the last 10 years and still going strong. Right now I've got it loaded up with camping gear, a climbing tree stand, and enough food to last me several days. I checked out a couple spots early in the float, but none of them made me want to stop and set up camp. One of the things I really like about float hunting is you get to see a lot of new country, and you can have a great float even if the hunting doesn't pan out. On the other hand, there's a lot more gear, logistics, and opportunities for things to go wrong on a float hunt. A few miles down the river, I heard the hiss of air escaping the raft. The raft has 4 different air chambers, plus the inflatable floor, so I decided to just keep rowing until one of them got soft. Turns out it was a pretty slow leak, and it was in the floor, which is the least important part, so I figured I could make it as far down the river as I wanted to and deal with patching the hole at camp. When I finally picked a spot to try hunting, there was only about an hour of daylight left, so I left the tree stand behind and decided to hunt on foot. The area looked pretty good, and I could see about 150 yards in most directions through the scattered cottonwood trees and waist-high grass. I hopped up on a deadfall so I could see over the tall grass and waited. About half an hour later, a buck came by chasing a doe, but they were moving pretty fast and I didn't get much of a look at them. It definitely convinced me that I should pick out a tree for the tree stand and come back in the morning. I got up early the next morning to get my tree stand set up before it got light. The morning hunt reminded me of being a kid up a tree in northern Wisconsin's big woods. The weather was even similar to how I remembered it, with overcast skies and high humidity. It wasn't too cold or windy though, so conditions were good and my hopes were high after seeing the deer the night before. I remember sitting in my tree stand as a kid for 9 hours straight the day I got my first buck. Since I moved out west, I haven't had to sit still that much. I do more spot and stalk hunting, so I'm out of practice, and I'm not that patient anymore. I only last until mid-morning before I climb down and wander around the woods for a while. I eventually climb up a hill to a good vantage point where I while away the afternoon looking over some of the river bottom. Just about the time when I'm thinking I should head back to the tree stand for the afternoon hunt, the wind picks up, some weather rolls in, and eventually it starts to sleet. The weather's not very conducive to hanging out in a tree stand, so I hunker down and hope the rain lets up before dark. The rocks are blocking about half of the raindrops, but I'm still getting wet and cold in the wind. When the weather finally lets up, there's only about an hour left of daylight, and I debate if it's worth walking over to the tree stand or if I should just stay where I'm at. Eventually I decide I need to warm up anyways, so I might as well walk over to the tree stand. I have a little trouble getting the climber started up the tree with my cold, wet hands, and given the short amount of daylight left, I decide just to hunt off the tree stand where it is about 6 feet above the ground. That's high enough to get me above the grass anyways. I've taken the shell out of the chamber of my rifle so that it's not loaded when I pull it up towards me into the tree stand. I'm a little cold and flustered at this point, and I untie the gun and set it on my lap. I stuff my hands into my pockets to warm them up without chambering a shell. Eventually I spot a doe a little over 100 yards away. She's feeding in and out of a low spot, and she's surprisingly hard to see in the muted light and tall grass. About 20 minutes later, the same buck I saw the night before is cutting through the grass about halfway between me and the doe. When the buck passes behind some cottonwood trees, I raise my still empty gun and take aim. When I get the crosshairs on him, I squeeze the trigger and hear the click of the firing pin as it strikes towards an empty chamber. After a moment of panic, I cycle the bolt to load the gun. I make a good first shot and a quick follow-up shot that drops the buck in his tracks. Now I'm really reliving my childhood memories, as this is not the first time I've tried to shoot a buck with an empty gun. All's well that ends well, though, and my first Montana whitetail hunt was a success. I gutted the buck and dragged him back to camp underneath the bright lights of a satellite cluster being launched into space. One of the best parts about filling your buck tag is getting to sleep in the next day. The weather wasn't exactly warm, but it wasn't windy or raining anymore, so it felt pretty good. Right about now, you start asking yourself why you brought so much crap. It all fits in the raft just fine, but loading and unloading it is a chore. Speaking of chores, I have one more that I forgot about. I have some tear aid along for quick and dirty patches. I'll glue on a piece of PVC for a permanent fix when I get home. On the float out, I keep my eyes peeled for good hunting spots. Maybe I'll do a duck or goose hunt down here someday. On the float out, it occurs to me that I've been out here for 3 days and I haven't seen another boat or a hunter. It's really surprising at first, but then I remember that I've lived in Montana for 10 years now, and this is my first time floating this stretch. One of the difficulties I've had on getting down some of these less traveled river sections, especially during the off-season, is a lack of shuttle options. There aren't any commercial services that'll move my truck to the other end, and finding a buddy who wants to camp in the cold is not always a sure thing either. Once I realized how easy it was to make a UTV street legal in Montana, and that they go 65 down the highway, I bought one mainly for use as a river shuttle, and it's opened up a lot of possibilities for me.